there's a moment just before I start a long and complex operation on the brain when everything has to go quiet. Not in the operating room. The room is full of noise. There's monitors beeping, instruments being laid out, and the anesthetists running around through their checks. I'm in quiet inside. Because what's about to happen over the next 8, 10, sometimes 14 hours requires you to hold your attention in one place without lapse for longer than your brain wants to cooperate. I'm a neurosurgeon, and the tool I rely on most, more than the scalpel, more than the surgical microscope or the ultrasonic aspirator, is my own attention. If my mind drifts for a few seconds whilst I'm dissecting a tumor of the facial nerve, the consequences are permanent. Someone wakes up from the operation and can't smile. Someone wakes up and can't hear. Or someone does not wake up at all. So, how do I prepare? I meditate, not in a monastery or a mountaintop. Most days I just sit in my office for 10, 15, 20 minutes. That's it. And on the days when even that is not possible, when the list is relentless and there's barely any time to eat, I do what I call micro-meditations or power meditations. A few seconds of deliberate awareness whenever I can find a gap. Walking between theatres, scrubbing in, even honestly sitting on the toilet. Any moment of pause becomes an opportunity. Pragmatically, I find the practice very helpful. But here's a question I get asked by a lot of people. Does meditation actually change anything in the brain? Or is it just placebo? Good vibes. I'm a surgeon and I want evidence. So let's look at the evidence. Honestly, carefully, and without overselling anything. Quick favor before we continue. If this is the kind of content you want more of, hitting subscribe makes a real difference. Thank you. So let me start with what I consider the strongest evidence we have. Meditation changes brain function and physiology. Not necessarily brain anatomy. We'll get to that later, but how the brain works and how the body responds to stress. One of the classic studies in the field was published in the Psychosomatic Medicine Journal in 2003. So that's quite a number of years ago. That study looked at healthy employees. This group of employees was assigned to an 8-week mindfulness program for control group. The meditation group showed a shift towards left-sided anterior brain activation, which was measured and confirmed on EEG, the electroencephalogram. This pattern of activation was associated with the positive affect, meaning a positive, resilient emotional state. But here's the part that shows that this study is particularly relevant. The meditation group also showed significantly higher antibody levels after influenza vaccination. So think about that. 8 weeks of meditation training and the immune system responded more robustly to a vaccine. That's not a subjective effect. That's not a saying, I feel calmer. That's a measurable, objective biological change linking brain activity to your immune function. A systematic review and meta-analysis of a number of randomized controlled trials found that meditation reduced several physiological stress markers, including cortisol, your stress hormone, systolic blood pressure, heart rate, and C-reactive protein. This is a molecule, protein involved in the body's response to inflammation. And this is probably the broadest and most robust physiological evidence we have. The mechanism isn't mysterious. Meditation combines attentional control, reduced cognitive emotional reactivity, it slows your breathing, and it increases your interoceptive awareness, which is your ability to consciously perceive and accurately interpret those signals coming from your own body, such as hunger, heartbeat, muscle tension. It connects those physical sensations to our emotional states. Together, all these effects reduce our sympathetic arousal, meaning our fight or flight system dials down. Now, the evidence I find most compelling as a neurosurgeon because it speaks to how the brain is organizing itself. It's to do with the connectivity data. Your brain has a network that activates when you're not focused on the outside world. When you're daydreaming, you're ruminating, or thinking about yourself. It's called the default mode network. And one of its key hubs is in an area called the posterior cingulate cortex. In a beautiful study published in the journal Biological Psychiatry back in 2016, the authors randomized stressed, unemployed adults to either mindfulness meditation or relaxation training. Now, mindfulness, but not relaxation, increased resting state connectivity between the posterior cingulate cortex and the left prefrontal cortex, that area of the brain where your executive control center is located. This is responsible for your ability to regulate attention, make decisions, inhibit impulses. Here's the exciting observation. This connectivity change statistically explained part of the later reduction in a molecule called interleukin-6. Forget about the name. It's an inflammatory biomarker. So it's a marker of inflammation. So the bottom line is that the brain's wiring changed, and that wiring change was linked to a reduction in bodily inflammation. So function changed, connectivity changed, and physiology followed. The same confirmation came from another study in 2022 on functional MRI scans, and it confirmed the same pattern. Mindfulness training alters connectivity involving the default mode network and the salience network. The salience network is the system in our brain that decides what information is in our internal or external environment is important enough to warrant our attention. If you think about this, the result of these studies are biologically plausible. They all make perfect sense. Meditation repeatedly trains you to notice your mind wandering and redirects your attention back. So you'd expect the circuits governing internal attention and salience detection to change. And they do. Another study published in Neuroplasticity in 2018 looked at the area of the brain called the hippocampus. They compared meditators who had been practicing for an average of over 6 years with matched controls during resting state, not during meditation itself. What they found was that the hippocampus, which is the area of the brain that has a central role in memory, spatial navigation, and that is particularly affected in Alzheimer's disease, for example, this area was more functionally connected to the rest of the brain in meditators versus controls. Now, this is a cross-sectional study, so the level of evidence is less than for a randomized controlled trial or a meta-analysis. The conclusion is that it shows correlation, not causation. We can't say that meditation caused the hippocampal connectivity difference, but if you combine the intervention studies showing functional changes after just 8 weeks, the picture that emerges is very consistent. Meditation appears to reshape how brain regions talk to each other, even at rest, even when you're not meditating. Now, I need to be straight with you because this is where a lot of YouTube videos on meditation go wrong. You've probably seen headlines saying meditation grows your hippocampus or 8 weeks of mindfulness thickens your cortex. Now, these claims come from older MRI studies which have been disproved by more recent studies. It doesn't mean that meditation has no effect on the brain. It means that the claim that an 8-week course physically enlarges specific brain regions is probably oversold. As I said before, the brain is changing how it works, its function, its connectivity, its signaling. But whether it's literally growing more grey matter in a few weeks is much less certain. Another claim is about the effect of meditation on heart rate variability. This is a parameter that expresses your ability to adapt and recover from a stressful situation. But again, more recent meta-analysis showed that this is not entirely true. Meditation may acutely alter your HRV, your heart rate variability, especially through breathing. and acute stress reduction. But the claim that it reliably raises your baseline resting HRV, that evidence is not there. So how do I meditate? My kind of meditation follows 3 phases, repeated over and over. Gerlong Tupton makes a point that completely changed how I think about this. Meditation is not about getting rid of our thoughts, but about changing our relationship with them. The first phase is when we're fully focused on the breath. The second phase is when we notice that our minds have wandered. Many people see this as a moment of failure. Actually, it is one of success. We were lost in our thoughts, but now we are aware again. The third phase is returning our attention to focusing on the breath. And that's it. Focus, notice you've drifted, return. The whole thing is a repetition cycle, like reps at the gym. And just as with physical training, benefit comes from repetition, not from any single perfect rep. When I sit before a long case, I'm not trying to empty my mind. That would be useless. And anyway, my mind is full. I've got surgical plans, contingencies, thinking about the anatomy, the brain scans. What I'm doing is training the ability to choose where my attention goes, to notice when anxiety or fatigue is pulling me somewhere unhelpful during the operation, and then to redirect it. That skill, call it attentional control, is exactly what the Neuroscience says meditation trains. And those micro meditations, those power meditations, well, again, there is a cumulative effect like with exercise. So you shouldn't really stop your activities in order to be mindful. You don't need to drop everything and pause. Small doses repeated often are far more effective. And that's my approach on a busy surgical day. I feel the ground under my feet as I walk from theatre to theatre. I notice the sensation of the water on my hands while I'm scrubbing. A few seconds of deliberate presence, and then back to work. There's nothing mystical, nothing slows down. It's just a thread of awareness running through the day. Let me summarize what the evidence actually supports. Meditation changes brain function, and that's strong evidence. EEG, electroencephalogram, fMRI, functional MRI scans, MEG, magnetoencephalogram data. These are all linked to measurable immune and inflammatory outcomes. Meditation alters brain network connectivity, particularly in the default mode and salience networks. And these changes correlate with reduced inflammation. Meditation reduces objective stress biomarkers, cortisol, your stress hormone, your blood pressure, CRP, the C-reacting protein, your heart rate. That's robust across a number of trials. What's less certain is that meditation physically enlarges your brain structures after a few weeks, or that it reliably raises resting heart rate variability. Those claims are popular, but the data doesn't fully support them yet. As a neurosurgeon, I see neuroplasticity every day in patients recovering from injury, in brains reorganizing after surgery for a brain tumor, for example, or after a stroke. The idea that deliberate mental training can harness that same plasticity is, quite frankly, one of the most exciting ideas in modern neuroscience. So you don't need a monastery. You don't need an hour, 2 hours every day. You need just a few minutes, or even just a few seconds of deliberate attention repeated throughout your day. The evidence says it will change your brain. My own experience says it might change your life. Thank you for watching.